Welcome to the Generative Age. I'm Donovan, your host, and I'm here with my esteemed co-hosts, Vyas and Brandon. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Yeah, and we're super excited to be talking about the graduation from PoC to production in this generative AI space. And I'm going to open by a recent quote that I heard from an article in a very esteemed publisher saying that 90%, almost 90% of pilots or POCs will not make it to production in the generative AI space. And I really wanted to tackle this, crack it open wide with you guys. And the first thing that I'd really like to pick your brains on is the mindset of POC versus MVP. Mm-hmm. Maybe Vyas, to you. I mean, we've chatted about this over coffee. I love the way you thought about this. Just give me your thoughts on this, POC versus MVP.
Absolutely. I mean, with an AWS off late, we don't even increase the term POC, especially on this generative AI. I mean, I was about to say edge, but generative AI. The reason is it's all in the mindset. So proof of concept is actually to prove that a concept works. But here we are, almost a year in, seeing some great examples of how you can leverage generative AI to enhance your business experience in terms of customer experience or productivity. You don't need a proof of concept.
The concepts are proved, right?
And it's also important from a mindset point of view, because the minute you think about a proof of concept, you literally get a license to throw that away. And we don't want that to happen, right? So it's always about, this is something which you need to really make it work. And in order to do that, always think about working backwards from customers and what outcome we want to drive with that. And the outcome need not be a think big idea. It's always start small, right? So you might eventually have a think big idea, but always start small.
Sure, yeah.
And always think about, can I actually take this? And we call it in two different terms. It's either an MVP, which is minimum viable product, or MLP, which I love, minimum lovable product, right? So this is something which just
like that.
works. And
MLPs all the way.
yeah, MLP. There you go. But if you have something which is workable and lovable, and if that can be taken into production and your end customers start using it, that's the best outcome you can get. So it's about changing your mindset of not thinking about a playground to try something else, but essentially getting an outcome, I think is the biggest mantra for us to be successful.
Do you find, I mean, because Brandon, maybe this is a question to you, is, you know, we've worked with a number of clients in this space, and you're starting to see some of the mindset change towards getting use cases into production, right? Are you seeing what Vyas is talking about in the market?
Yeah, I would say so. So some clients are definitely under this mindset where they don't even want to talk about POCs. Anything that they have that has been validated as a use case just goes directly to MVP, which has the advantage of anybody who's building that solution is actually going to take the long view and plan for, okay, how is this going to be hosted? How much is it going to cost? How do I actually make it work? Versus we want to build a POC, which is effectively in my field means that somebody will be on their laptop, build a demo, and have it just locally running on their computer or something, which is not something that you can throw into production. And generally, like, the quality is much lower. So that there's like a huge distinction between people who want to put something into an MVP initially versus I have no idea what I'm doing. Let's do a POC because I need you to tell me whether or not it's possible, even though we technically already know some things are possible and some are not. So,
and we keep circling back to this. So this upfront business validation part is really important in this process, right? It's doing the due diligence upfront before we start really working on anything. Can you, Vyas, maybe you want to just talk to that for a second?
Yeah. Any new technology, right? If you think about it, and I'm probably going to address something more before I get to your question, Don, is it's always like, oh, this is a net new cool technology. How about me using it to get something out, right? So usually that's the mindset which we see. A lot of companies start off with, and usually when you see a failure, call it proof of concept or even an MVP, is because of that. Literally, I use the analogy of, taking a hammer and looking for a nail, right? Just because you have a hammer, you don't have to search for a nail.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I think that's the biggest challenge which we have seen, where a lot of people who start with what is called as a POC and fail. And this is to your question again, why is it important not to start with a tool as a solution versus what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
And
It's a
that's
really
true.
good point.
That's true for anything. It's just not for generative AI, right? So this is what we call internally within AWS is working backwards from the customer, where we always want to make sure that, are you trying to solve something? And by using technology, how can you solve that better, right? I think that's the most important question which you need to address with the right stakeholders.
Yeah.
You'll always find a lot of enthusiastic IT people within a company wanting to say, this is a cool technology, I want to try this. And then when they start speaking to their business counterpart, they might not find value.
Yeah.
So I think the other important point I would say to your question again is that when you think about value, make sure that you involve all the right stakeholders, right from technology to the business, to identify what's that use case which would add value, be it a net new experience which you have never thought about before, or optimizing through process optimizations, right? So it could be any of the use cases, always work backwards from there.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. If I can be vulnerable for a second, once upon a time in my career, we decided to build a technology in isolation from real market validation and, really going the distance on, testing the value with the respective business teams. And at some point, we were on this POC journey and we thought this was really cool. And we spent 6 months on it. And then we felt we were too far in and we couldn't backtrack. And so we really pushed hard. We invested a ton of money into it. We got it into production only to realize it's too expensive to actually really run in production. And I eventually decommissioned the tool and we sold off parts of the intellectual property. So it was a really hard lesson to learn, and my stakeholders were not overly excited by this exercise. But what I did learn on the journey was that there was a lot of my team upskilled and developed themselves in this journey. And it was great. It was streaming technologies. It was Kafka. It was all the AWS servers. It was containerization. It was automation. It was really cool stuff. And the team was really excited about it, partly why I kept it alive. But, we're talking...
Thank you for that, by the way.
But we're talking, is the idea or concept of POCs all bad? Or is there a healthy balance? I agree with having the mindset, let's go in with this needs to get to production. Let's do the business validation. Let's make it an MVP with the mindset to get it to production. But maybe to Brandon, to you, I mean, we've been on this journey together for a while. Is it all lost? Or is there a balance somewhere in between all of this?
As with any career or field or anything that you're doing, you need to have some space for learning, and it just so happens that sometimes that learning space, especially in like GenAI and NLP, is done on POCs. So if you give us the opportunity to build out a POC, that is a really great way for us to learn those new technologies while still producing something that may or may not be used later in some other solution or something. So I think it's super important. You can't always just assume that you're going to go to MVP with everything. So even if you don't move something into production, for the people that are doing it, it's a really useful way to build those skills. And I guess the other thing, I want to turn this on its head, actually, because sometimes even the business people, they will come up with a really cool idea, and they just want to know whether it is possible or not. So they'll go to the technical people, is this possible? If the answer is yes, we're going to build it, even though they haven't thought ahead. Is the business case or is the use case actually validated? Is it going to bring value? And then by the time that we finish doing our little worker ant sort of like job for a few months or a couple of years, and then there's no buy-in. But so for us, it's a really useful learning experience. But for the business people at the beginning, it's always a good idea to have everybody talk together. Does this make sense? What kind of value is it going to generate? Not just, is it possible?
Yeah.
It's a really important question.
And in that cycle of you and your teams, I mean, are you finding that even if you, and I'm assuming when you talk POC and validating some of these, questions from the business folk, you're not investing a year, you're investing 2-3 days, a week maximum, trying to get something out there as quickly as possible, if it doesn't make it into production because it doesn't have the right business validation behind it.
Right.
Is that all lost time, or are you able to recycle some of the learnings in that? And have you found that some of that has been useful in solving some of the much bigger cases that do have real business validation behind them.
Yeah, for sure. We recycle everything. So anything that we do or put together, like not just my team, I'm sure other teams do this as well. Anytime that you write code or you put together a new solution, even if it doesn't get taken to production, it's super useful to have that just as like boilerplate code that you can copy into other projects or build new tools that you hadn't thought of, that you hadn't built out in the past. And at least for our team, these POCs that don't make it into production, rather than being lost causes, we actually turn them into demos, and then we like have all of those demos just sitting in a repository where we can show clients immediately, we've done this and this and this and this and this. Do any of these pique your interest? If so, then we can build on top of it, even though it didn't go live into some production system in the past. So super useful. Yeah.
Super cool. And yes, you've got a similar ethos within your organization.
Totally.
Right, with your clients.
Totally. Experimentation is the key.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't experiment, you will not expect some great results coming out. Innovation comes through experimentation. The important thing to keep in mind is that MVPs can actually fail. I think it's not that MVPs won't. That's why it's called MVP, because it is actually doable. Can we start small and can we get an outcome? But the question is how quickly you pivot versus how quickly you pursue. That's the most important question there.
Sure.
And sometimes an idea might not work, which is perfectly fine. You still have to experiment. But I think where I've seen success is actually having that mindset, saying that if it works, I'll take it live. If it doesn't, I will shelve it. And it doesn't mean it's a throwaway. It's here is something we tried, and you probably learned something from it. And to your point, it could become a demonstration of something which can be achievable in a different context,
right,
which you would learn. And that is something which you can always make use of it. But the whole mindset, and this is something which is very close to me, because the minute someone says this is just something as a concept, the mindset is that, oh, maybe it's a concept, then we'll have to develop it a little more to take it to production, which always I've seen drags on. And sometimes you lose focus. And that's where I've seen a lot of enterprises just scrap it. And the article which you mentioned clearly talks about that and highlights that. And that's why many of these proof of concepts fail to actually see the light of the day, right? So I think
and we want our users to graduate from this POC phase into real production. So I think this change in mindset from the outset is very, very important. And you just want to leave our listeners with this: is think about the outcome, think about the problem you're trying to solve, think about production, have production in mind from the outset, work back from that.
I think that's a good segue. You talked about graduation from POC to production, right? We talked about technology. But GenAI is a transformative technology, right? It has a huge implication on transformation. As Deloitte, what are the challenges you have seen from customers going into production because they've not thought about the large business transformation?
That's a great question. Yes. I mean, when we talk about business transformation, we always talk about people, process, and technology. And we've spoken a lot about technology today. We've spoken a bit about people and having the right mindset. But of course, the process that follows the technology is very, very important. So starting with the correct stakeholder engagement. Do we have the right stakeholders? Do we have the right buy-in? Are we able to articulate the value that our hypothetical use case brings to the business? Are we thinking about the impact and the outworking of this use case has on the business and the people and the change management that needs to go around that? As an example, we've implemented as Deloitte a number of use cases internally. So it's transforming the way we're thinking, transforming the way we do our day-to-day business, how we used to read emails, how we used to prepare content. But there's a massive amount of education, a massive amount of learning, a massive amount of user acceptance testing, and all of these things that go into technology adoption. And let's not forget, when we talk process, thinking about security, compliance, making sure that we're working with our DPO and all these types of stakeholder groups, that they're bought in, that they're part of the journey. And then we talk general governance around these technologies, right? So how are we governing them? How are we securing them? How are we provisioning them to business? So this is a massive part of business transformation. And sometimes we can get caught up in the tech And we could talk about having the right. Well, Brandon, that's your game. But when we think about business transformation, it has to be people, process, and technology. And if you leave any of those elements out, it creates grounds for failure in general. So yeah, yes, that was a absolute fantastic question.
I think that was a great call out, Don, because that's what we see on the ground as well. It's easy to implement a solution. The most hardest part is actually rolling it out and making sure that everyone understands what's their role when they roll out, especially some of the transformation technologies like generative AI. And hopefully our listeners now can understand the complexity of this. And with your experiences, now it's easy to not think about POC, but actually doing an MVP and taking it to production.
And this is our job as consultants, right? It's like we come alongside our clients, take off these heavy lifting, bring the methodology and the approach to these things, making sure you know how to engage, how to articulate value. And this is really where we can add a benefit alongside our clients, together with partners like yourself. So this has been a really cool moment with you guys. Really appreciate it. And to our listeners out there, I trust this was insightful to you and educational to some degree as well. Remember, generate responsibly.